Good morning, Colorado. This is Christy Crum, and I am with Laura Lasater, and she has been in the medical profession for quite some time. And can you share with everybody a little bit about your background?
Sure. I've been practicing medicine since 1996. I'm an internist, so I'm trained in internal medicine. I used to practice at the county hospital here, and I had my own primary care patients. I also worked in the urgent care clinic and with HIV patients. I also did research and taught the residents. So I was performing a number of different duties, if you want to call that, at the hospital.
Awesome. So why do you think it's important to get education and awareness out about genetically modified organisms?
I think this is one of the most hazardous health issues out there right now. Yeah. And as an internist, I treat a lot of chronic disorders like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, high cholesterol. And right now, we treat those mostly with pharmaceuticals. I really believe that we should be treating them with lifestyle changes as a first-line therapy, including dietary changes. And I don't think enough people are aware of the role that genetically modified foods play in their health. So I want to get the word out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us because, you know, I'm not the expert, and I have to go out and I have to find people like you that know the truth and see the results and the effects of what they're doing to us. And so are there any known studies with animals and things? What are these GMOs doing to animals, you know, with these studies?
Mm-hmm. First of all, there are hundreds of studies out there, so I can't obviously go into all of them.
Right.
But I can share a couple that I think are really well done.
That you can reference and let everybody go check out for themselves?
Sure, and a really good reference is responsibletechnology.org.
Love that one.
It has everything you could possibly want, including citations for the research that's been done. It also has a paper called Myths and Truths. It's over 300 pages long, but the table of contents allows you to go in and pick precisely the topic that you're interested in and just go to that page without having to read the whole document. So I think it'll be really helpful for people, especially now that this is on the ballot, to label GMOs, to have that as a resource to educate themselves. There will be a lot of misinformation out there. We can be guaranteed that. We've seen that happen in California.
And Washington.
And so what do we do about that? Well, we empower ourselves. This is a resource that you can use to check for yourself, to fact check.
I love that because it seems like the more and more research that I do, I keep finding more disheartening things. And you know, maybe we can go over a few of those today, and maybe we won't have enough time. But so, you know, the process of GMOs and in our environment, why is it a health concern? Why is everybody why are some concerned about this and some are not?
Well, I think we have to understand what the process is to start with, to understand what the health concerns are. And it'll be very obvious once you understand how these crops are genetically engineered. Basically, genes from bacteria, viruses, and plants are spliced together. Mm-hmm. This would never occur in nature. You never see plants mating with viruses or bacteria mating with viruses.
Oh, come on.
It just doesn't happen. So genetic engineering is very different from traditional or selective breeding, mm-hmm. which involves species that are closely related that could mate naturally. What happens is farmers or horticulturists will just facilitate that process by taking the pollen from one plant and transferring it to another. So this could naturally occur by itself.
Okay.
Genetically engineered foods, on the other hand, are made in a lab. Right. Basically a gene with a trait that the industry wants, like RoundUp resistance, mm-hmm. which makes the plants resistant to RoundUp, or Bt toxin producing, which allows the plants to produce their own pesticide. Those genes are spliced.
We love our bees, right?
Exactly. Those genes are spliced along with a viral gene that turns that sequence on. Mm-hmm. And then they're inserted into plant cells. And the way that's done is the engineers will use a gene gun, in most cases, to shoot this new constructed piece of DNA, which is called a gene cassette, into the plant cells. This is like a shotgun approach, so it's not precise at all. That gene cassette can end up anywhere in the DNA of the plant. And in the process, it can cause a lot of mutations. And those mutations can result in proteins that don't work anymore, or cause allergies, or can become toxins because they're overproduced. There's a whole array of possibilities of adverse consequences from this approach. There's also an opportunity for mutations once the DNA has been inserted. How do the researchers know that the plant cells have taken up the
Good question.
DNA? Well, they know because within that cassette that they made, there's an antibiotic resistance gene from a bacteria. So what they do is they take the plant cells on a plate and they apply that antibiotic to the plate. And only the plant cells that have taken up the cassette will be resistant to the antibiotic. So those are the ones that they want because they know that those will also have the genes that confer RoundUp resistance or Bt toxin production. And then they clone those plant cells. And in the process of cloning, there's another opportunity for mutations. So the whole process is prone to creating changes in the DNA that are unanticipated and may have adverse consequences.
Which I think we're seeing now, would you not agree?
I would. We know that from animal studies.
Yeah.
And we have seen a huge increase in allergies, among kids especially, and gastrointestinal problems. We don't know for sure if it's the genetically modified organisms that are causing this, but there is a correlation between the use of these genetically modified crops and the incidence of these diseases.
And I think that that's something that we need to take into consideration is that because there is a patent on these seeds, that we're not allowed to do any test studies on them. That's what they keep saying, there's no long-term studies. And I think that that's why the Right to Know campaign and me being a volunteer are so passionate about the label is because there's just, quote unquote, not enough studies, which I truly believe in my heart that there is. We've had plenty of studies over the years. A wonderful book to check out is Poison Spring by E.G. Valientos. You can get that on Amazon.com, but it's pretty alarming about the contamination and the studies that are held from us right now. So, it's a real touchy subject, and it's like if there's nothing wrong with them, then just label it. But,
Well, yeah, I can speak a little bit more to that.
Okay.
There is no post-marketing surveillance right now in the U.S. because we don't even know what we're consuming.
Right.
We don't have labels on GMOs, so we can't track diseases and link them back to eating
Exactly.
these. There are no regulatory or regulators in the world who are requiring long-term studies or human trials. We do not have any human clinical trials. We do have some other studies with human beings that give us other interesting information, but we don't have any trials where one group of participants is randomized to eat a GM crop and the other group is randomized to eat a non-GM crop. We have no studies like that.
Well, I definitely don't want to be the blind study on that one. I really don't. I've always said it's kind of funny to me. It's almost like a joke, but they put this Roundup resistant into the stalk of the plant, so when the bug eats that plant, the stomach blows up. So I've said, I'm like, wow, that's really interesting because I wonder what it's doing to our stomachs.
So that actually is there's a little confusion about that. That's
Okay.
not the Roundup ready gene, that's the Bt toxin producing gene.
Okay.
And yes, that works by perforating an insect's intestines. Could that occur in us? Yes, it could.
Well, I kind of link that to the leaky gut that everybody keeps talking about. Would that not be a correlation?
It's possible, certainly. And we do have an in vitro study with human cells that shows that Bt toxin does the same thing with human cells. It pokes holes in them.
So why isn't that enough scientific evidence to put a label on our food?
What a great question. If you talk about the precautionary principle, they shouldn't be on the market because there is enough evidence out there that they are causing problems in animals and may be causing problems in us. When GM soy was introduced in the United Kingdom, soy allergies skyrocketed by 50%.
Is that not enough evidence? How can we have that evidence, but they don't seem to take that as evidence?
Well, the industry self-regulates. So when the GM policy was first drafted by the FDA, many scientists within the FDA voiced their concerns. They were concerned about possible toxins, allergies, nutritional deficiencies, and new diseases. A lot of the time is that these researchers are targeted by the biotech industry, and they're ridiculed, they're censored, and sometimes they lose their careers by pursuing this. I'd like to share 3 animal studies with you that I consider extremely well designed. And since I've done research myself, I do know some of the ways that data can be manipulated or what possible confounders there are in the research, all the pitfalls. So the first study was a study done by a Russian scientist named Irina Ermakova.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. And so she studied rats that were fed either GM soy or non-GM soy. And these rats were pregnant. So she looked at the offspring and found out that at 3 weeks, the offspring of the rats that were fed GM soy were smaller, and they had a 50% mortality rate compared to the other group that only had a 10% mortality rate. Even more disturbing to me is that she found out when she looked 3 generations out, those babies were sterile, completely sterile. And so for me, if this is applicable to us humans, the choices that we're making today about what we eat could potentially affect our offspring and our whole lineage, future generations.
What do you think about the statistics saying, I know one woman had talked to one of the directors at the EPA, and she was saying that in the next 20 years, 60% of our children are going to be less and less and less intelligent. Do you think that could be a possibility?
I do think that could be a possibility. I'm not sure if it's related to the genetically modified food itself or the RoundUp that is applied to it. RoundUp is kind of a toxic brew of different chemicals, and the main active ingredient is glyphosate. Glyphosate has been linked to, both of them have been linked to developmental disorders, birth defects, cancer, neurotoxicity, which could cause some of the things you're talking about, like autism. Yeah, I can't think of any others right now, but even that list is pretty significant. Glyphosate also kills the beneficial bacteria in our guts preferentially. So there are 2 main groups of bacteria in our gut, and there are millions of bacteria. Some of them are considered beneficial. They help us with digestion. They help our immune system. And some are considered pathogenic, which means disease-causing. And we found that glyphosate preferentially kills the beneficial bacteria, so it shifts the balance of the gut flora. And this can lead to all kinds of problems.
That's scary.
It is scary. In addition, glyphosate works as a chelator. And what that means is it binds to metals like magnesium, calcium, iron.
Those are all things that are very, very important to us.
Yes, they are. And when it binds to them, it makes them unavailable to us nutritionally. Also, when the glyphosate is excreted, bound to those metals, it damages the kidneys. So
So I'm sorry, you said that the glyphosate has these abilities to damage the kidneys, the GI tract, all these other things. So coming from biochemical companies, really, that's how they design chemical warfare? And so these are the same Agent Orange, DDT, PSI, or, but these are all what they use as chemical warfare weapons. And so now they're doing this to kill weeds, or?
Well, that's a great question. Let me just say that currently a pesticide called D4D, 2,4-D, is being considered.
That one, yes.
To replace the glyphosate. And the reason that's being considered is because nature has a way of getting around problems. And Roundup is a problem for weeds from their perspective. Mm-hmm. So some of the weeds have developed resistance to the Roundup, and now they have a growth advantage over the other weeds that are killed by Roundup. So what we're seeing are millions of acres in this country that have Roundup resistant weeds. And farmers have tried to compensate for that by applying more Roundup. But that doesn't seem to be working right now. And so the companies are developing more and more toxic pesticides and herbicides. 2,4-D was one of the ingredients in Agent Orange. So you're correct.
Well, and I think that's what led me on my mission for truth, because I think that you can get so overwhelmed with the information provided out there that you really don't know who's telling the truth or who's not. And, I support the Right to Know campaign in such a huge way, and I just wanted to come out and interview people that know, that have been there, that see it, they're in it, and they're concerned about it. So thank you so much for, wanting to bring that education and awareness out there, and I can't thank you enough for what you do.
One of the best studies that has been done was done by a French researcher named Seralini.
I've heard of, yeah.
Yes. And this was a very well-designed study. And in it, rats were fed GM corn, which produces Bt toxin.
Which is now registered with the Environmental Protection Agency as a Bt toxin. Corn in America is registered as a Bt toxin.
As a pesticide.
Right. Yes, as a pesticide. That's kind of alarming that they can do that. And they're like, oh, yeah, just go ahead and eat it. It's just a pesticide.
I want to point out, too, that the Bt toxin in corn is different from the Bt toxin that's being sprayed. It's more toxic and it's more highly concentrated by 1,000 times.
How is that?
Well, because it's in the DNA of the corn. So every cell of the corn, every plant cell, is producing the pesticide. So when you eat the corn, you're getting a huge dose of the pesticide.
And I feel bad because when you go to people's houses and they're serving corn, you almost don't want to eat it, but then you're like, well, what do I do? Because I don't want to upset anybody, but I really do not want to eat that big thing of pesticides.
Well, I don't.
Yeah.
And there was a study with pregnant women that showed that 93% of them had Bt toxin in their blood. Now the industry has told us that the genes of these genetically modified plants are broken down when they're digested. When we consume them, the stomach acids and enzymes in the stomach will break them down. Now, this study suggests otherwise, because the Bt toxin is showing up in these women's bloodstream. Right. Not only that, but 80% of their fetuses had Bt toxin in their bloodstream. It was in the umbilical cord blood. Well, I think we take things step by step.
One thing at a time.
We got it on the ballot.
Yes.
And now what I'm trying to do, and I know what you're trying to do, is educate people.
Yep.
And we can empower ourselves. And we already know that 75% of Coloradans want labeling. The problem is that these corporations come in and fund a counter campaign with millions of dollars.
I know.
Spreading these myths and misinformation and scaring people. So again, I would just encourage you to take a little time to do your own research. If you have a question about something, look it up on an up note, on an optimistic
I like up notes.
Yes. And just say that even though it may feel like we don't have any power in this situation, the corporations are too big and they have too much control, that's absolutely not true. Because we saw what happened in the United Kingdom when consumers just stopped buying genetically modified foods. They were banned. And that was because of market pressure. That's not a hard thing to do. That just involves making different choices around what we're buying.
Right. It's doable. We can. There's a tipping scale going on right now, and I believe it's only, 5% of the population, which is only 15. I'm trying to take this from Jeffrey Smith because he said it's only roughly about 5% of the population that can tip the scale and make them go more organic and do things more appropriate for our humanity, our environment.
Just doing a little bit, that adds up,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Love you.